Well, good Thursday evening. Meteorologist Evan Stewart here. Thanks for joining us on Hurricane Hub Live. This is our 4th episode, and we'll continue to do this throughout hurricane season, talking about what's going on in the tropics. It's fairly quiet in the Atlantic, so we'll talk about the Pacific as well. Talk about some of that Saharan dust that is still out there and some of the water temperatures. Things are ripe for development. We just haven't seen too many of those systems move off the coast of Africa that have really developed into anything. And a lot of that has to do with the Saharan dust. Satellite here across the Atlantic Ocean. And again, you can see it's fairly quiet. Of course, a couple of days ago, we had Tropical Storm Andrea. Formed around 11 o'clock in the morning, fell apart by 11 o'clock at night. Wasn't expected to last very long, only survived about 12 hours. So moved off into the North Atlantic. And we have seen these waves coming off the coast of Africa, but they really haven't had the opportunity to develop because there's still a lot of dry air in the intertropical convergence zone. You will notice there is a cluster of thunderstorms right there east of the Lesser Antilles. A little bit, I'll add on that Saharan dust and show you that there's a little bit of a gap right in there where the air is not quite as dry. So we are seeing some of those thunderstorms develop. And if you were watching Tim yesterday, he was talking about this cluster of thunderstorms down here in the Western Caribbean. You can see here that we are watching, some thunderstorm development. And as of the 5 o'clock update from the National Hurricane Center, we're saying no, we're not looking at any tropical systems that are set to develop. However, with the 8 o'clock update that just came in, which is one of the reasons we do this, at 8 o'clock, we did get an update from the Hurricane Center that over the next couple of days, an area of low pressure is expected to form here just east of the Yucatan Peninsula, cross over the Yucatan, and then move over here into the Bay of Campeche, the southern Gulf, giving us a slight chance at some development. Right now, it's expected for Nicaragua and Honduras to give them quite a bit of rain. And one of the concerns is once you get up into those higher mountains there in Honduras, Nicaragua, and even over towards El Salvador, we start to see, the higher mountains and the heavy rain comes down, and that could lead to some flooding and mudslides. So you don't even have to have a tropical system to have an impact. But right now, Hurricane Center is saying 10% chance it might develop here in the Western Caribbean. Once it crosses over the Yucatan and gets here into the southern Gulf and over towards the Bay of Campeche, about a 20% chance of development. So there is something to watch, and the water temperatures are very warm. So we already have that one ingredient. Of course, you need 80-degree water temperature to get that tropical development, sort of fuel those tropical systems. Now, I mentioned the dust that is out there, and notice this big plume of dust out here through areas around the Bahamas, the Greater Antilles, the Lesser Antilles. And you'll notice where that dust is, hardly any clouds there because that atmosphere, it's not just the dust. The atmosphere is very dry, and you can see a lot of dry air here coming off the coast of Africa and over towards the Cabo Verde Islands. South of that, that's where we've seen some of those clouds. And I mentioned that little cluster of thunderstorms in there. You can see how that's sort of an area where we have a gap in some of that dust and that very dry air. So that is allowing some thunderstorm activity, but that's not expected to develop into anything as it's still going to run into some very dry air here into the Caribbean. So the one area that we're really watching, again, is back there over towards the Western Caribbean. And even that, there's only a 10 to 20% chance over the next couple of days. Now, I mentioned those water temperatures are very warm here in the Gulf of Mexico right now. Looking at water temperatures well up into the mid to upper 80s, very warm for this time of year. Of course, as you get closer to the coastline, it's a pretty shallow seabed there. So that's one of the reasons why we have issues with storm surge on the west coast of Florida. It also means with the water being a little bit shallower that you don't have to heat it up as much. Of course, deep water, you get down there and you get some upwelling and some cooler waters. But here you can see water temperatures well up into the 80s. So it could certainly support any kind of tropical development, even 84-degree water here towards the Bay of Campeche. So again, with that tropical or that area of low pressure that's expected to cross over the Yucatan. That's why we're looking at maybe some development. Once you get down here, if it continues to move off towards the northwest, there's not a lot of time for it to develop, for it to develop. And that's something that we'll certainly continue to watch. As we get out here in the Central Caribbean, low to mid 80s, 84 right now. West of the Lesser Antilles, here south of Hispaniola and Puerto Rico, mid 80s as well. So water temperature is certainly warm enough for that tropical development. Again, you need over 80-degree water, so certainly you have the fuel out there. And as we get out here into the Atlantic, of course, we get those waves coming off. Water is very warm. But you get just north of that and we get back into the 70s. So here towards the Azores, this is also where we're seeing that very dry air. So if any of those tropical waves, excuse me, the Cabo Verdes, if any of the waves are closer to the Cabo Verdes, they're just not really going to have that opportunity to develop. You don't have the warm water. You have a lot of that dust that is with it. So again, that's why we really haven't seen much going on in the Atlantic Ocean. Now that hurricane forecast, here they are, from the Hurricane Center, NOAA, 13 to 19 named storms, 6 to 10 hurricanes, 3 to 5 major hurricanes, Colorado State 17, 9, and 4. So a little bit above average. Over the last 30, 40 years or so, 14 named storms, 7 hurricanes, and 3 major. And you might remember last year was an active year, even though, we say it's an active year or a quiet year. That really doesn't matter if one storm hits here in Hampton Roads or where you happen to live. So even what it would be considered a quiet season, if one of those storms hits you, it can still be a bad season. All it takes is one. So we talk about these averages and the forecasts and stuff. And of course, the more storms there are, the better chances or the higher odds, I guess you could say, that something could make landfall. But again, all it takes is one. Let's talk about the 2025 hurricane season so far, those hurricane names for you. Of course, we had Andrea, a very short-lived tropical storm. The next name on the list is Barry, and again, we're not expecting that over the next 7 days. There's a very low odds of that system down towards the Bay of Campeche. Chantal, Dexter, Aaron, Fernand, Gabrielle, Umberto, Imelda, Jerry, Karen, Lorenzo, Melissa, Nestor, Olga, Pablo, Rebecca, Sebastian, Tanya, Van, and Wendy. So that's the Atlantic. This is the Climate Prediction Center's 2-week forecast for where we're expecting tropical development. And you can see it's down here off the coast of Mexico, which has been very, very active over the last month or so. Matter of fact, back in May, we even had tropical systems developing down here. Of course, the hurricane season in the Pacific starts on May 15th. It's June 1st for the Atlantic. And you can see right now, we're really not looking at anything beyond that 7-day forecast that we had from the Hurricane Center with that one little system in the Western Caribbean. And then as we look out towards week 3, so July 9th through 15th, not looking at any tropical development. So that's certainly some good news. Things are looking a little bit quieter, but we do have something that is going on in the Pacific. Of course, that's where all the action has been over the last several days. And you can see this cluster of thunderstorms here south of the Gulf of Tepultepec. And this is expected now a little bit of a higher odds than a 90% chance of development over the next week. And that sort of lines up in that same bullseye area that the Climate Prediction Center was looking at as well. You can almost see that, that circle is sort of similar to what they were saying. So we will be watching down here, whether that drifts towards the Mexican coast or stays offshore. Still remains to be seen as the system hasn't even formed yet. 50-50 chance that it might form over the next couple of days. Within the next week, about a 90% chance. And here are those specific names. I'm not going to go through the whole list, but certainly you can remember that we started out with Alvin and Barbara and Cosme. Dahlia and Eric was the major hurricane there, a Category 4 storm that impacted areas of Mexico. So certainly it's already been very active in the Pacific, quiet in the Atlantic. So that's your tropics update here on Thursday, June 26th. Again, just got that update in from the National Hurricane Center. 10 to 20% chance of a system possibly developing in the Western Caribbean or into the Gulf of Mexico or the Bay of Campeche as we head into the weekend or early next week. But otherwise, things are pretty quiet in the Atlantic. Now, we'll be here every Monday through Friday, 8 o'clock with Hurricane Hub Live right through the hurricane season. So be sure to check us out on 13 News Now Plus.